$5.7 billion. That's the financial toll the U.S. tourism sector absorbed in 2025 because Canadian travelers opted to vacation elsewhere. Not due to an economic downturn, not because of currency fluctuations, because Donald Trump spent 12 months treating Canada like a dependent territory that should be thankful for American acknowledgement. Canadians responded by redirecting their travel spending to other destinations. Montana ski destinations watched their Canadian reservations evaporate. Florida accommodations experienced 20% visitor declines. Maine dining establishments recorded their poorest performance ever, surpassing even COVID-era losses. Border duty-free establishments reduced personnel by 80%, all because the U.S. president repeatedly declared his intention to absorb Canada as the 51st state, and Canadians took umbrage. This wasn't orchestrated by Ottawa. This wasn't legislated policy. This was 20 million individuals independently concluding that if Trump regards them with disdain, they'll direct their spending toward destinations that genuinely welcome them. The economic consequences are so substantial that American senators are journeying to Ottawa, requesting the boycott's cessation. Congressional panels are releasing reports documenting the destruction. Welcome to the unintended ramifications of alienating your primary source of international visitors, where political discourse carries a price tag measured in billions, and Trump's compulsion to dominate allies is eliminating American jobs. But before we explore this development, if you value comprehensive analysis of this caliber, please hit that like button and subscribe to remain informed on the developments that genuinely matter. Tonight, we're revealing the magnitude of Canada's tourism withdrawal, which American regions are experiencing the greatest impact, and why this signifies a foundational transformation in how Canadians perceive their relationship with the United States that will endure beyond Trump's tenure. Let's begin with the scope of economic harm Trump's rhetoric generated. The U.S. Travel Association projected a 3.2% reduction in international tourism expenditure for 2025, $5.7 billion in losses compared to the prior year. They attribute the decline primarily to one element. Canadians aren't visiting anymore. Canadians constitute the largest contingent of international tourists to the United States. 28% of all foreign guests, $20.5 billion in expenditure in 2024 alone, 20.4 million visitors crossing the border annually to shop, vacation, visit relatives, and patronize American enterprises. In 2025, that stream of tourism revenue became a trickle. October statistics from Statistics Canada reveal return journeys by Canadians to the United States plummeted 24% for air travel and 30% for land travel compared to the identical month in 2024. Not down marginally, down by a quarter to a third. Road traffic from Canada declined 38% in May. Air travel dropped 22% in June, the fifth straight month of year-over-year reductions, each month deteriorating further than its predecessor as boycott momentum accelerated. Border crossings between January and October diminished nearly 20% overall, with certain states witnessing drops as substantial as 27%. This isn't random variance. This is deliberate avoidance. A Longwoods International study in April discovered that 60% of Canadians were less inclined to visit the United States within the next year due to American policies, trade approaches, and political declarations. Of those, 36% had already canceled planned excursions. An Angus Reid survey in mid-February revealed that 48% of Canadians had already canceled or were seriously considering canceling or postponing plans to visit the United States. In Quebec, of the 20% who had arrangements to travel to the U.S. in 2025, 45% either already canceled or intended to cancel. That represents an estimated $3 billion in economic losses for the United States from just one Canadian province. These aren't theoretical figures. These are actual excursions canceled, actual hotel accommodations vacant, actual restaurant seating unfilled, actual retail locations without patrons, and the American tourism sector is in turmoil. A Congressional Joint Economic Committee report released in December documented the destruction state by state with data and testimonials from business proprietors whose survival depends on Canadian tourism. New Hampshire witnessed a 30% decrease in Canadian guests. State-operated campground bookings declined 71% in the opening 5 months of 2025. One lodging proprietor in North Conway reported 30% of accommodations empty during summer weekends that typically sell out. Maine business proprietors described catastrophic losses. Old Orchard Beach reported a 50% drop in Canadian visitors. The worst year we've experienced. We've never encountered a year like this, even worse than COVID, stated business owner Moshe Agam. Montana, where Canadians accounted for nearly 80% of international visitors in 2024 and contributed $170 million to the state economy, witnessed border crossings down 19% in the first 10 months of 2025. One establishment reported a $38,000 loss after a Canadian sports organization canceled its reservation for 70 accommodations and a 200-person dinner. Diane Medler, executive director of Discover Kalispell in Montana, stated businesses observed a 25% decrease in Canadian travel in spring and a 44% drop later in the year. Credit card expenditure in Kalispell plunged 39% in 2025 compared to the previous year. Florida, among the premier destinations for Canadian snowbirds, witnessed visitor numbers collapse 20% in the second quarter and 17% in the first quarter. Real estate professionals reported Canadians listing properties for sale due to the current environment between Canada and the United States, with Canadians representing 15 to 20% of purchasers in certain markets. Hawaii experienced a 9.4% decline in Canadian visitors in the first 7 months of 2025 compared to 2024, and a 27% decline compared to pre-pandemic 2019 levels. Expenditure by Canadian visitors fell 4.9% from $668 million. Dining establishments reported noticeable declines, with one stating Canadian arrivals to Maui were down 28% compared to 2019. Vermont accommodations, New Jersey recreational vehicle parks, Niagara Falls lodging establishments, all reported identical narratives. Bookings down, revenues down, personnel reductions, economic suffering spreading through communities that constructed their business frameworks around dependable Canadian tourism. The congressional report concluded, going back for generations, Canadians have visited many states along the U.S.-Canada border to see family or friends, stay in our hotels, share a meal at our restaurants, and shop at our stores. However, in the wake of President Trump's reckless tariffs and needless provocations, fewer and fewer Canadians are making trips to the United States, putting many American businesses in jeopardy. The boycott isn't about financial models and economic projections. It's about individual Canadians making conscious decisions to bypass the United States because Trump made them feel unwelcome in a nation many regarded as a second home. Lena Yusfi, a Vancouver attorney, typically visits Hawaii 4 or 5 times annually. She previously resided in Maui and was contemplating purchasing a 2-bedroom condominium there. But after Trump imposed tariffs and reiterated his desire to transform Canada into the 51st state, she canceled her trips. Obviously, out of loyalty to Canada and our values, and just holding our ground, we had to cancel. A woman from British Columbia forfeited a $5,000 deposit to cancel a 5-week vacation to Palm Springs. Not rescheduled, canceled, accepting a $5,000 loss rather than spend funds in the United States. A Florida motel proprietor reported, I've witnessed a customer dropping a $1,000 deposit to choose to visit Cuba instead. Canadians are selecting Cuba, a nation under American sanctions, over Florida because they'd rather support a Caribbean island than contribute money to Trump's America. One retiree from Cobourg, Ontario, had traveled to Orlando, Florida to play golf every winter for 20 years. In March, he canceled his annual trip and declared he would not return while Trump held office. By December, his stance hadn't changed. Still no change. Not going back. Lorna Hunt, CEO of the tour company Great Canadian Holidays, stated that most of the firm's U.S. tours are dead in the water because Canadian customers backed out. The anger isn't with the American people. The anger is with Donald Trump. And the feeling is that if he's going to wage war with Canada, something we never requested, an economic war, then why on earth would they spend a nickel in the United States when they don't have to? That sentiment reverberates across Canada. An Ipsos poll in early February discovered that 68% of Canadians thought less of the United States after Trump announced tariffs. Not disagreed with policy, but thought less of the country itself. This isn't temporary political discord. This is fundamental reevaluation of whether the United States merits Canadian expenditure, Canadian tourism, and Canadian goodwill. The boycott isn't confining Canadians to their homes. It's redirecting them to destinations that genuinely welcome them. A Snowbird Advisor survey discovered that 70% of Canadian snowbirds plan to visit the United States this winter, down from 82% last year. However, 23% plan international destinations besides the United States, up from 12% who did so last winter. The number planning overseas travel nearly doubled. Mexico, Costa Rica, warmer European nations are all benefiting from Canadians seeking winter sunshine without the political complications of supporting Trump. The Caribbean is witnessing increased reservations. Even Cuba is gaining Canadian tourists who previously went to Florida. Many Canadians are simply traveling domestically. Provincial governments noted heightened interest from Canadian tourists and deployed new advertising initiatives encouraging domestic travel. Manitoba increased Tourism Manitoba's budget by $4.5 million specifically to capture Canadians who might otherwise have visited the United States. This internal redirection generates economic advantages for Canada, while simultaneously denying revenue to American enterprises. Canadians aren't sacrificing vacations. They're spending their funds domestically or in nations that treat them respectfully. The transformation is so substantial that duty-free establishments at the border, which depend on Canadians crossing to shop in the United States, reported sales declines of 40 to 50% between January and April. One Surrey-based proprietor of a duty-free shop stated, "Our business has dropped over 80%, and now we've reduced our staff and reduced our working hours. This morning, we're operating on a skeleton crew of only 3 to 4 people, when usually we have about 20 people working. An 80% decline from 20 staff to 3 or 4. That's not a downturn. That's devastation." American tourism boards and businesses watching billions in revenue vanish have launched increasingly desperate initiatives to entice Canadians back. Montana, after initially abandoning Canadian tourism campaigns in summer when they received negative reactions, is attempting again with a Canadian Welcome Pass, offering discounts on lodging, dining, and attractions exclusively for Canadian visitors. "We miss you," the campaign implores. Las Vegas launched week-long promotions with special tourism discounts targeting Canadians. Buffalo, Seattle, upstate New York all initiated campaigns with offers attempting to demonstrate they still value Canadian visitors. Palm Springs erected signs across downtown reading, "Palm Springs loves Canada," with the mayor noting Canadians spend $300 million yearly in the region. California launched an entire statewide tourism campaign encouraging Canadian visits. These aren't standard marketing initiatives. These are emergency responses to economic crisis. American communities dependent on Canadian tourism are pleading for their return, offering discounts and assurances they're still welcome, even if the president treats them with contempt. But the campaigns aren't succeeding because the issue isn't pricing or convenience. The issue is that Trump spent a year informing Canadians they're not a legitimate nation. They should be absorbed. They exist solely to serve American interests. And you cannot discount your way out of that insult. Senator Maggie Hassan, ranking member of the Congressional Committee that released the report on Canadian tourism losses, stated, "In the wake of President Trump's reckless tariffs and needless provocations, fewer and fewer Canadians are making trips to the United States." Hassan was part of a 4-senator delegation that traveled to Ottawa in July to meet with Prime Minister Mark Carney and discuss the damage. American senators journeying to Canada to apologize for their president's conduct and plead for economic relief. But the political damage is complete, and the economic ramifications are escalating. The U.S. Travel Association estimates that even a 10% reduction in Canadian tourism means $2.1 billion in lost expenditure and 14,000 American jobs at risk. Current statistics suggest the actual decline significantly exceeds 10%. Tourism economics forecasts that if the trade conflict expands to include not just Canada, but Mexico, China, and Europe, the outcome could be a $22 billion loss in tourism revenue from international visitors. $22 billion. Much of that would stem from Canadian boycott effects cascading through the industry. The broader travel sector is projecting a $70 billion travel trade deficit for 2025. The United States historically maintained a travel trade surplus, more international tourists arriving than Americans traveling abroad. Trump's policies have completely reversed that. This matters because tourism isn't like manufacturing, where you can simply restart production when conditions improve. Tourists who establish new vacation patterns, discover new destinations, build new traditions, don't automatically return when political tensions ease. Canadians who spent 2025 exploring the Caribbean, traveling domestically, or visiting Europe have now established those alternatives, accommodations they prefer, restaurants they discovered, activities they enjoyed. Why return to Florida when Costa Rica was wonderful and didn't carry political baggage? The reputational harm to American tourism will persist long after Trump departs office. Every Canadian who canceled a trip, forfeited a deposit, altered vacation plans because they felt unwelcome remembers that sensation. Many won't forget even when the specific provocations cease. Young Canadians who might have developed lifelong patterns of visiting the United States for spring break, summer vacations, winter escapes, are instead building travel patterns that exclude America. That's future revenue lost for decades. The tourism boycott transmits a message that Trump either cannot or will not acknowledge. Actions have consequences, even for the President of the United States. When you treat allies with contempt, they respond. When you threaten to absorb a sovereign nation, its citizens take offense. When you impose punitive tariffs and claim your neighbor is stealing from you, they decide not to give you their money voluntarily. Trump operates on the assumption that American economic and military power means allies have no alternative but to accept whatever treatment Washington administers. The Canadian tourism boycott proves that assumption incorrect. 20 million individual Canadians exercising consumer choice to bypass the United States is economic power that no trade negotiation can override and no tariff can neutralize. It's soft power in reverse, where the smaller nation punishes the larger through voluntary actions that cost American workers billions. Unlike government policies that can be negotiated or reversed, consumer sentiment is slow to shift and difficult to repair. You cannot sign an agreement to make Canadians want to vacation in your nation again. You must rebuild trust over years. Trump's approval rating sits at 36% in the United States. His favorability in Canada is even lower. Every month, Canadians continue avoiding American travel. American businesses suffer economic damage that creates political pressure for policy modifications. Republican senators from border states are already breaking with Trump on tariffs because the economic suffering is too severe to disregard. Tourism boycott effects amplify that pressure by affecting service industry workers, small business proprietors, and communities that vote Republican, but require Canadian dollars to survive.